Hey guys, tonight, we're diving into something a little less glamorous, a little more fishy, literally. Imagine this, you wake up in a Viking fishing village, it's the year 870, and your alarm clock is a rooster that sounds like it's holding a grudge. Your bed, a rough straw pile shared with your cousins and their surprisingly expressive goat. Outside, a cold wind cuts across the icy coast, and the faint scent of smoked herring wafts in through the door, mingling with something less pleasant, maybe unwashed feet, maybe seaweed. Probably both. You stretch, but you don't get far. The low ceiling of your turf-roofed home has already greeted your forehead with a hearty bonk. Welcome to your day, you're already mildly concussed, and you haven't even touched a fish yet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location. And local time, I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The chill hits you the moment you step outside. It's not a polite chill. It's the kind that wraps around your bones and whispers bad choices into your ears. Your tunic is wool, but wool doesn't care. It's itchy and damp, clinging to you like a wet cat. There's frost on your boots. There's frost in your nose. You'd cry, but your tears would probably freeze mid-blink. Your first task of the day, gutting fish. Lots of them. Piles of them, actually yesterday's catch, stiff from the cold and still smelling like regret. You crouch beside a half-rotted plank used as a makeshift table. Someone left a dull knife stuck into it, and by someone, I mean probably you. Your hands are already cold, but now they're wet, and within 5 minutes, you've lost all feeling in your fingers. The guts are slippery, the fish are stubborn, and your back already hurts. Viking chiropractors, not a thing. Historians still argue whether gutting was considered an essential part of daily chores for every villager, or if it rotated among families. But lucky you today, you're the chosen one. As you scoop slimy entrails into a wooden bowl, you're being watched. Not by people, mind you, by seagulls, dozens of them, judging you from every rooftop and post. Their beady eyes track every flick of your knife. One swoops a little too close and you instinctively flinch right into a bucket of fish guts. Elegant. Now let's talk breakfast, or the lack thereof. You head back inside with your sleeves soaked and your dignity a bit damp too. A thick, pasty porridge sits in a cracked bowl by the hearth. It's made of barley and sadness with a hint of salt if you're lucky. There's a crust of dried honey you might get to scrape off the side of a clay jar if your older cousin doesn't beat you to it. Viking diets were surprisingly healthy by medieval standards, with access to fish dairy and root vegetables. But for the fishing class, luxury meant no mold and some warmth. Breakfast is eaten quickly in silence, save for the occasional slurp or cough. No phones, no YouTube. Just you, a wooden spoon, and the slow realization that you're already tired. You glance around the dim room lit by a sputtering oil lamp. The walls are coated in soot, and there's a smell you can't quite identify. It might be sheep. It might be wet dog. It might be wet sheepdog. The fire in the hearth crackles with peat smoke, which means your lungs are getting their daily workout in. Who needs cardio when you can just breathe your own chimney? You step outside again, your breath a cloud in the morning air. The village is small, maybe a dozen homes clustered like cold ducks along the shore. Children dart between the huts wrapped in oversized wool cloaks that make them look like tiny moving haystacks. A woman walks by balancing a basket of dried fish on her head like it's a fashion statement. Spoiler, it's not. Quirky fact break. Did you know some Viking communities used fish skin as a material for shoes? It's true. Surprisingly durable, but let's be honest, Not exactly what you'd wear to prom, and definitely not waterproof enough for the slush puddles that are everywhere. Your boots squelch with every step. You make your way toward the docks, if you can call them that. It's more like a splintery platform that looks one wave away from collapse. The sea stretches out ahead of you, dark and rippling and somehow more judgmental than the seagulls. Fishing boats bob in the water, tethered with worn ropes and hope. Someone's already yelling about how the tide's changing, and if you're not rowing by dawn's light, you might as well go home. Oh wait, you are home. Great. This morning routine is every morning. No breaks, no brunch, no bubble baths. Just cold air, cold fish, cold water, and the occasional warm spoon of barley paste. Life in a Viking fishing village is repetitive, harsh, and extremely damp. And that's before the winter winds really get going. Now imagine trying to explain your electric blanket to these people. They'd either assume it was sorcery or try to wrap it around a goat. Anyway, you've still got a long day ahead. The fish won't catch themselves, and you're not even on the boat yet. Maybe after lunch you'll start rowing, assuming your fingers haven't fallen off by then. By now, your hands feel like fish sticks, numb, cold, and slightly oily. But the day doesn't wait. After your glorious breakfast of lukewarm barley mush and passive-aggressive glances, it's time to get to work on the gear that keeps your entire village alive, the nets. These aren't your modern-day synthetic fiber fancy pull-tab fishing nets. Oh no. These are painstakingly hand-tied from flax or nettle fibers, each knot as moody as a sea captain with a toothache. And guess who gets to help mend them today? That's right, still you. You sit cross-legged on a flattened patch of earth outside a storage hut, surrounded by coils of rough netting that smell like seawater mildew, and memories you'd rather not revisit. The sun's out technically, but it's more like a weak glow hiding behind a wall of gray clouds. It provides just enough light to see that you're not making any progress. You try to follow the pattern the older fisher is demonstrating, loop twist knot, but your fingers are stiff, and every time you almost succeed, a gust of wind slaps your work right out of your hands. It's a lovely exercise in humility. And finger cramps. Historians still argue whether children in Viking fishing villages were involved in net making, or if that was left to more skilled adults. But based on the way everyone here expects you to pull your weight, you're not getting a free pass just because you still have baby teeth. The rule is simple. If you can move, you can mend. You glance around, hoping to spot someone who's worse at this than you, but everyone, even the goat, seems more competent. A grandmother with 2 teeth and a massive braid is whipping through knots like she invented them. You try not to cry. Again, the tears might freeze. And just when you're getting into a rhythm, when your knot actually starts looking like a knot, and not a seaweed disaster, a bird poops directly onto your shoulder. You look up betrayed. The seagull cackles. It knows. You spend hours like this. The minutes blur together, broken only by the occasional shout from someone asking if you're still on that one square or offering you a quick warm-up in the form of a swig of sour milk. You politely decline. Even in your misery, you have standards. Then there's the sea salt. It's in the air, it's in your hair, and it's in every open cut you didn't know you had. It stings, but only when you can still feel your skin. Soon your fingers are too numb to register pain or progress, which honestly helps with the existential dread. Mainstream historical fact. Viking fishing villages along the coast of Scandinavia relied heavily on net fishing, especially for herring. These silvery fish were a dietary staple packed with protein and much easier to dry than, say, a walrus. Nets were prized possessions, often requiring dozens of hours to construct and maintain. Lose a net, and you might as well have lost a limb. Of course, every now and then you hear whispers about more unusual uses of nets. One older villager mutters that a cursed net once dragged 3 boats to the bottom of the fjord. Another insists her great-uncle wove protective runes into his net, which somehow kept him dry during a squall. Quirky tidbit. Some nets were rumored to include strands of human hair for strength or magic, or just because it was available. No one's sure. Someone hands you a bone needle and gestures to a torn net section. You try threading it with the twine, but the end keeps splitting. You lick your finger and try again, earning a look of horror from the woman beside you. "Sea fingers," she says grimly. Apparently, licking your fishy, bacteria-riddled fingers is frowned upon. Noted. The afternoon wears on. Your back is sore, your knees are frozen, and your patience is thinner than your gloves. Oh, wait, you don't have gloves. There's talk of rowing out soon, which fills you with both hope and dread. Hope, because it means you'll be doing something else. Dread, because that something is rowing into the open sea, in the freezing cold, with arms that feel like soggy breadsticks. Still, there's a strange rhythm to it all. The mending, the shared complaints, the occasional burst of laughter when someone ties their own hand to the net. You might be miserable, but at least you're not alone. There's even a weird sense of pride when you manage a patch that holds its shape. You show it to the nearest adult. They squint at it, grunt, and say, "Could be worse." High praise, really. You pause to stretch your legs, walking a few steps toward the edge of the dock. The boats are almost ready. Long, narrow, and smelling of tar and fish oil, they bob gently with the tide. The oars rest beside them like silent promises of pain. You wonder if rowing burns enough calories to offset the 2 spoonfuls of porridge you had. Probably not. Maybe if you add in the emotional exhaustion. Your fellow villagers begin rolling up the nets, bundling them onto the boats along with baskets, knives, and bundles of dried moss for who knows what. You're told to grab one end of a basket. You do, and immediately regret it. It's heavier than your entire body. You pretend it's fine. Your spine disagrees. By now the clouds have thickened. The wind picks up, whipping across the bay and dragging the smell of fish and seaweed into your nostrils yet again. You're going to carry that scent in your soul. There's no soap strong enough. One final note before the boats launch. Some villagers are quietly spitting into the sea. A good luck charm, apparently. You join in. Why not? If Poseidon's cousin is listening, you could use a little mercy, because next up, you're rowing. For hours. Into water that's colder than your ex's heart. You don't exactly climb into the boat so much as fall into it like a sack of semi-conscious firewood. The floor is slick, the planks creak ominously, and there's a suspicious puddle near your foot that smells like both fish and fear. The boat is a long, narrow Viking-style rowboat, technically called a fairing, but you quickly realize there's nothing fair about it. The others settle in beside you with the casual exhaustion of people who have done this every day of their lives. You try to match their confidence, but your oar is heavier than expected, and your bench is unforgivingly cold. It's a rustic thigh workout with a side of frostbite. A gruff man with an impressive beard and no visible sense of humor gives the signal, and just like that, you're off. The oars creak in their locks, and the sea makes that glug-glug sound like it's considering swallowing you. You're rowing toward the horizon, if you can call a murky blur in the fog a horizon. The wind is against you because of course it is, and every time you dip your oar in the water, it tries to yank your arm off in return. Your shoulders ache by the 5th pull. Your back is in open rebellion by the 10th. By the 15th, you're wondering if this is a prank. It isn't. It's just life. Row, row, and row some more. Mainstream historical fact. Viking fishing expeditions regularly involved rowing several kilometers offshore. especially during herring season. Their boats were often light enough to carry over land, but sturdy enough for open water, perfect for those who enjoyed a bit of maritime misery with their meals. You try not to look behind you because the village is shrinking, and the further you row, the more the fog swallows up everything. The cold sea air bites at your cheeks and ears, your breath a steady puff of frost. You can't feel your toes. You can't feel your knees. You can feel the developing blister on your palm, which now looks like a sad raisin. The waves aren't exactly big, but they're relentless, slapping against the hull, splashing your arms, and sometimes sneakily soaking your backside when you least expect it. You glance over the side of the boat and instantly regret it. The water is black and bottomless. Somewhere below you imagine ancient sea creatures watching you with mild amusement. If one of them eats you, at least you won't have to row anymore. Quirky tidbit. There's a theory that some Viking fishermen would sing rhythmic chants while rowing, not just to coordinate the effort, but to keep away sea spirits. Apparently the ocean gets nervous if you're too cheerful. You try humming something upbeat, but it comes out more like a sad groan. Still, your neighbor gives you a nod. Either he appreciates the effort or he's trying not to laugh. Historians still argue whether rowing was a shared community responsibility or a role taken mostly by younger, stronger villagers. Based on the way everyone's ignoring your suffering, you're going to guess they just assumed everyone rows until they collapse. Occasionally, someone points out a bird in the sky or a ripple that might mean fish. You squint, but all you see is more water. There's no radar, no GPS, no fish-finding app, just your aching arms and blind faith. You're told to row in sync, but it's easier said than done. You're too fast then, too slow. Then you catch your oar on the side and nearly fling yourself into the sea. Graceful. Eventually, someone shouts and the boat slows. This is the spot. You're far enough from shore that the water feels endless, deep, mysterious, possibly vengeful. The nets are unrolled and dropped into the sea like offering gifts to an invisible god. You're assigned to hold one of the lines, which immediately pulls taut and threatens to drag you overboard. You lean back, legs braced against the bench, pretending you totally have this under control. The waiting begins. No one talks much now. The air is tense, expectant. Even the wind hushes a bit. You sit there dripping wet and wobbling slightly, staring at a patch of sea that looks exactly like every other patch of sea. Occasionally a seal pops up, stares at you like you're the joke of the week, then dives away. You try to feel connected to nature. Instead, you feel like your butt has become part of the boat. Every minute feels like 5. Your hands are cramped. Your arms feel like they've aged 20 years and your lips are dry despite the fact that your entire face is somehow damp. One of the older men squints into the waves and says, "She's stingy today." He means the sea, apparently, not a boat spirit. Probably. You nod like you understand. Just when you're ready to fake a dramatic feint and hope they paddle home without you, the net tugs. Hard. Everyone springs into action, barking instructions and pulling at ropes. You do your best to copy them, dragging the heavy wet net inch by painful inch toward the boat. Water sloshes in. Your boots fill. Your back is screaming. But then, yes, there's movement. Slippery, writhing silver flashes. Fish. Real fish. Herring mostly, maybe some cod if you're lucky. The net heaves with the weight of your village's next few meals. There's a collective grunt of satisfaction, the only Viking equivalent of a celebratory fist bump. The catch is dumped into the hull in a spectacular display of splashing chaos. A fish slaps you in the neck. Another one flops right into your lap and makes prolonged eye contact. You mutter an apology and flick it back into the pile. As you sit back panting and soaked, you can't help but feel the tiniest flicker of pride. You helped. You contributed. You may not feel your extremities, but you've done something real. Something old. Something fishy. Now time to row back. Yup, still you. Rowing back to the village after a successful catch should feel like a victory lap, except that every part of your body has filed a formal complaint, and your muscles are staging an insurrection. The oar feels heavier, the wind shifted because of course it has, and now you're rowing against the tide. Again. You wonder if the ocean is doing this on purpose. You suspect it is. Every pull of the oar sends a new jolt through your shoulders and down your spine, like some ancient Norse punishment ritual cleverly disguised as cardio. Your arms burn, your back aches, and your hands, let's just say the blisters have leveled up into something closer to medieval torture devices. At least the boat's not empty now. The fish slosh around at your feet, gasping, flopping, and occasionally slapping you in the ankle just to remind you who's boss. It's like rowing inside a very damp, very judgmental seafood market. You try to distract yourself by watching the sky. The clouds have shifted slightly, letting through slivers of watery light. A gull circles above, eyeing your catch with suspicious intent. The air smells of salt and seaweed, and just a hint of old rope, something that might be comforting if you weren't soaked and sore and actively losing feeling in your lower half. Your rowing partners aren't exactly chatty. Most of them are either grunting softly or muttering things like almost there, with the same energy someone might use while crawling through a desert. But there's a rhythm to it now, an exhausted, slightly pitiful rhythm, but a rhythm nonetheless. Mainstream historical fact. Viking fishing trips could last for hours, even days, depending on the season and the fish population. While open sea expeditions in larger ships were known, most everyday fishing was done close to shore in smaller boats like the one you're in now. These smaller crafts were easier to handle, but also more vulnerable to changes in weather. One surprise squall, and it was game over. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking fishermen tied small charms to their boats, carved pieces of wood or bone, sometimes featuring faces or runes, believed to keep mischievous spirits at bay. One of your companions has a small carved seal hanging from a leather thong near his seat. You stare at it for a moment too long. He notices. "My aunt says it keeps sea trolls away," he says flatly. Then he adds, "but not cousins," with a smirk. Historians still argue whether Viking villagers treated fishing as a respected trade or simply as a lower-tier task for those not cut out for raiding and warfare. The current vibe suggests this is respected hard work, though nobody's exactly handing out gold medals. After what feels like an eternity, the shoreline begins to emerge from the mist. Your village gray, smoke-threaded and slightly crooked, is still there. You could weep. You might. Your legs are too cold to stop you. The boat crunches into the gravel, and you practically roll out onto the shore like a shipwrecked sailor. Everyone else is already moving, grabbing baskets, hauling ropes, lifting the heavy net full of slippery reward. You manage to stand knees trembling and stumble after them, dragging a half-full basket of fish that smells like a biology exam gone wrong. The work doesn't stop just because the boat hit land. Now it's time to sort, clean, and prep the fish, which sounds simple until you realize cleaning means slicing them open, scooping out their innards, and rubbing them with salt, all with hands so numb they might as well be made of wood. You're handed a bone-handled knife that looks like it's seen more fish guts than sunlight. With some gentle instruction and a slightly concerned glance from a nearby elder, you begin the process. Slit scoop salt. Slit scoop salt. Try not to cry. Try not to nick your thumb. Try not to wonder how the fish feel about all this. And the smell, oh friend, The smell commits. It clings to your skin, seeps into your clothes, and sets up permanent residency in your nostrils. You could bathe in pine needles for a week and still reek of dead ocean. You glance at the older woman beside you. She's gutting fish with mechanical precision, barely even looking down. First time she asks, you nod, embarrassed. She gives you a once-over and shrugs. Could be worse. Last winter, a lad sliced off the tip of his, she pauses, thumb. You suspect that's not the original ending of the sentence, but you appreciate her editing it for your PG-13 brain. Once cleaned, the fish are either cooked immediately dried on wooden racks or packed in salt-filled barrels. You help hang a few on the rack, a precarious wooden frame that sways in the wind like it's daring you to lose your balance. You don't. Barely. By now your fingers feel like dried seaweed. Your stomach growls, but the cooking fires are still being stoked, and dinner won't be ready for a while. Someone hands you a crust of something that might be bread, or might be the top layer of a barnacle. You chew it anyway. The salt helps. Mainstream fact bonus: fish preservation was essential in Viking times. Drying and salting allowed food to last through long winters and sea voyages. Without refrigeration, every bit of moisture had to be removed, or the fish would rot, which explains why everything here smells like a salt shaker got into a bar fight with a mackerel. You're told to take a break, but breaks in a Viking fishing village don't involve hammocks and lemonade. More like stand in the least windy spot you can find and hope no one hands you another knife. You lean against a post, watching the sun begin to dip behind a thick bank of clouds. It's barely mid-afternoon, but light is already fading. Winter days here are stingy and short. Some kids are playing nearby, tossing a fish head like it's a beanbag. One of them offers you a turn. You politely decline. You've had enough fish-related trauma for one day. As twilight settles in, there's a strange sense of peace. Not comfort exactly, but the kind of dull, earned exhaustion that follows a day of relentless work. Your clothes are stiff, your hands are raw, and your soul smells like cod, but you're alive. Sort of. Mostly. Someone calls out dinner's close. You follow the others back toward the central longhouse, your legs dragging your brain, slightly pickled in fish oil. As you walk, the cold air nips at your neck and slips down the back of your tunic. You mutter something unkind about the wind. It doesn't care. You pass the boats now empty, pulled up onto the pebbled shore, and left to drip in the gathering dark. The water beyond them is still black, unknowable. You survived the fishing trip. Barely. Dinner in a Viking fishing village isn't exactly a candlelit feast. There are no gold goblets or flowing tablecloths unless you count the crust of dried fish scales on your sleeve as decor. But you're not picky right now. After hauling your half-dead body through saltwater fish guts and rogue sea breezes, you'd eat just about anything that isn't trying to wriggle out of your hands. Inside the longhouse, the air is warmer, thick with smoke sweat, and the ever-present perfume of old fish. It's the kind of scent that gets into your lungs and makes itself at home, like an unwanted roommate with strong opinions. You duck inside, blinking through the haze. The walls are lined with woven mats and drying herbs, but it's the central hearth that draws your attention, a wide, stone-ringed fire pit that hisses and crackles like it's glad to see you. You sidle up to the edge, careful not to trip over someone's stray boot, or possibly a small child. Around the hearth, people are seated on low benches, or directly on the packed dirt floor, forming a loose, smoky circle of hungry humanity. A cauldron bubbles in the center, and you try to convince yourself it smells edible. Mainstream historical fact. Viking meals were typically simple, but hearty. Dinner usually consisted of a stew made with barley root vegetables, like turnips or onions and surprise fish. Meat was rarer and often reserved for feasts or special occasions. Ale or mead, might accompany the meal, though water and fermented whey were more common daily drinks. A large ladle dips into the pot, and someone slaps a wooden bowl into your hands. Your portion, something grayish and lumpy, with a few visible chunks of something that used to be a carrot. Maybe. You're not sure. It wobbles in a way that food probably shouldn't. You take a tentative bite? Well, it's hot, that's something. The flavor is not complex. If you enjoy textures like gritty wet bark and slightly charred sadness, you're in luck. Still, it's warm and filling and you're too tired to care. You eat every bite like it owes you money. Nearby, someone chuckles. You glance up to see a young man grinning at you over his own bowl. Tastes better after rowing, he says. You nod mouthful of questionably textured turnip. He's right. Or you've simply lost the will to complain. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking families flavored their stews with seaweed and dried fish bladders, which were believed to add protein and magical protection. Supposedly, the bladder of a codfish was excellent for warding off trolls. You don't know about trolls, but you're pretty sure nothing could survive inside this stew. You eat in relative silence, interrupted only by the occasional slurp or the shuffle of someone refilling their bowl. A baby wails somewhere in the back, then is promptly comforted with a rhythmic chant in Old Norse that sounds half lullaby, half magical incantation. It works. The fire pops. Historians still argue whether Viking communities had formal meal etiquette or if it varied widely by region and class. From your current perspective, the rule seems to be don't hog the stew and don't fall asleep in it. Reasonable. Someone hands you a hunk of coarse barley bread that could double as a medieval doorstop. You chew it dutifully, chasing it with a sip of sour, cloudy ale that tastes like it was brewed by someone who hated joy. But again, it's calories. You're not here to judge. As the meal winds down, conversation begins to stir. Someone recounts the day's catch, another tells a story about an ill-fated voyage last season when the sea ate half a boat. You're not sure if that means storm monster or poor carpentry, possibly all three. A few people chuckle, others nod solemnly. You're invited to share a story. Panic flares. You consider recounting that time you ordered sushi through an app and it came warm, but that probably won't resonate here. So instead, you smile politely and pretend your mouth is too full to speak. The children are now half dozing against their parents' legs or chasing each other near the entrance with carved wooden fish on strings. One slips and lands in a heap by your knee. She looks up, giggles, and runs off again. Her tunic is smeared with what you hope is fish stew. You lean back slightly against the wall, letting the heat from the fire soak into your bones. The ache in your muscles is still there, but it's dulled, now softened by the flicker of firelight and the hum of quiet conversation. You're not comfortable exactly, but you're not miserable either. That's about as good as it gets here. The evening transitions slowly. Some people drift out to tend to animals or finish chores. Others unroll bedding near the far wall, laying down sheepskins or fur cloaks for warmth. There are no beds, no mattresses, just wool and wood, and the sound of the wind nudging at the corners of the longhouse. You're offered a spot near the wall, sandwiched between a wooden beam and a snoring farmer. It's not glamorous, but it's horizontal. You lower yourself onto the furs, sighing as every bone complains in protest. Your last act before sleep is kicking off your stiff boots, one of which takes a solid chunk of your sock with it, and wrapping your arms around yourself for warmth. The fire dies slowly, casting red shadows that flicker across the ceiling like ghostly ships. The air cools. The room hushes. And for a moment before sleep takes you, you realize something odd. You survive the day. You with your soft city hands and your tendency to Google how to boil an egg made it through a full Viking fishing day. You didn't fall overboard. You didn't offend the sea spirits. You didn't even lose a finger. Not yet, anyway. Morning comes early in a Viking fishing village, not with a gentle sunbeam or the smell of coffee, but with someone stepping directly on your ankle while trying to stoke the fire. You jolt awake, making a sound somewhere between a grunt and a yelp. The offender grunts back, possibly an apology, possibly just the village equivalent of "you'll live." Your body feels like it's been borrowed by someone who used it very, very badly. Every joint pops when you sit up and your back crackles like an old wooden ship. You grope for your boots, which are somehow still damp. You jam them on anyway. There is no such thing as dry in this village. Outside, the wind hasn't taken a day off. It slices through your tunic like you're not even wearing one. You wrap your cloak tighter, if only for emotional support, and trudge toward the center of the village. A rooster crows with too much enthusiasm for your current mood. You consider launching a fish at it. The village is already humming with activity. Smoke curls from rooftops, children chase goats that absolutely do not want to be chased, and someone is yelling about a missing bucket. You drift toward the shoreline where boats are being prepped again. You pause, hoping, praying that someone tells you you're off the hook today. They don't. Mainstream historical fact. In many Viking coastal settlements, fishing was a near-daily task, especially in spring and summer. The short daylight hours in winter meant fishermen had to take advantage of every usable moment, and missing even one day could put the whole household's food supply at risk. You weren't just fishing for dinner, you were fishing for survival. You're handed a coil of rope and told to make yourself useful. That seems optimistic. You try to look competent as you follow a group toward the smaller boats, not the deep-sea nars, but the open boats meant for near-shore waters. Today's trip is short, they say. Just checking traps and rebaiting lines. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking fishermen believed in weather charms, little pouches of herbs or feathers that could supposedly calm the wind or summon fish. One old man pats the pouch at his waist and mutters a rhyme in Old Norse before pushing off. It sounds like poetry, or a very old curse. Either way, you try not to make eye contact. Historians still argue whether these charms were seen as genuine magical tools or simply comforting traditions passed down through generations. You suspect it's a bit of both. Who wouldn't want a sea spell when you're rowing through a fog bank that looks like it might eat the boat? You set out again, the morning mist, thick and wet, and determined to sneak down your collar. This time your boat hugs the coast, gliding over calmer waters. You find yourself easing into the rhythm, faster muscles remembering what to do, though they're definitely filing a formal protest about doing it again. You stop to check the lines first. Long cords tied to driftwood floats, weighted with stones and baited with everything from old fish scraps to dried sea mollusks. The first one yields 2 decent-sized cod. You smile. The others cheer. You feel like a Norse Neptune. But the next float is tangled. You're handed the task of reaching over the side to untangle it. The water is bone-cold and dark, and you're suddenly very aware of how easy it would be to tip the boat, or lose a hand to whatever just brushed your fingers. You freeze. Probably just seaweed, someone says helpfully. You do not feel helped. Eventually, you wrestle the line free. It holds a single angry crab. It waves a claw at you like it's challenging you to a duel. You decline. You toss it into the bucket and promise to keep your distance. The boat drifts to a rocky inlet where traps, woven baskets designed to funnel fish inward, have been staked overnight. Retrieving them is delicate work. One wrong tug and the trap spills open, which you learn the hard way, dumping 6 slippery eels across your lap. You scream quietly, inside. The others laugh. One says, Good luck sleeping tonight with that in your dreams. You do not feel reassured. By midday, you've checked the last of the traps, and the boat begins the slow glide home. This time, rowing doesn't feel quite as miserable. You've stopped trying to fight the rhythm. You just let it happen. There's something weirdly hypnotic about it. The creak of wood, the splash of oars, the hiss of the breeze skimming the surface of the water. You even catch yourself humming a little. It's a song you don't know the words to pick up from the others. Just syllables and a beat something ancient and worn and steady, like the sea. Back on land, you carry the bucket of catch-up-the-hill arms trembling under the weight. Someone claps you on the shoulder. You're almost a real fisherman now, they say. Almost. Lunch is dried fish and thin porridge served in the open air, where your spoon doubles as a wind vane. It's not glamorous, but again, warm, filling, and functional. You eat without complaint, watching smoke rise from the chimneys, and villagers move through their daily routines. The older woman from yesterday sits nearby, shelling mussels and muttering about someone's lazy son. You wonder what her life looked like 20 years ago. Did she gut her first fish at 5, lose her first cousin to a rogue whale? She notices your stare and offers you a mussel. You accept. It tastes like salted rubber dipped in sea brine. Not your favorite. After lunch, you're shown how to patch nets, an art form, really. The threads are coarse, stiff from sea exposure, and your fingers clumsy. You jab yourself 3 times before managing a single clean knot. A boy half your age finishes 5 patches before you do 1. He winks. Fast fingers, he says proudly. You resist the urge to hand him your net and just walk away. Mainstream bonus Viking fishing gear was largely handmade, and maintaining it was a never-ending task. Nets were woven from horsehair or plant fibers like nettle, and hooks were carved from bone or metal. A damaged net could mean losing an entire catch, or worse, getting tangled in the water and dragged under. The sun dips low again too soon. You help drag the boats up the shore and stow the gear your hands scraped and raw your back feeling like it aged a decade overnight. But you made it through another day. As you head toward the longhouse, someone presses a cup of warm fermented whey into your hands. You sip it. It's sour and strange but comforting, like liquid exhaustion. Before turning in, you help cover the drying racks with rough canvas to keep off night frost. You fumble with the ropes, your fingers barely cooperating, but you manage. Just before you duck inside, you glance back at the water. The sea is quiet tonight. The boats rest like sleeping animals, hulls dark against the sand. You exhale. Still here. Still whole. Still tired. It's your 3rd day in the village, and by now you've accepted a few hard truths. 1, nothing in this place is ever fully dry. 2, you will never not smell like fish. And 3, your modern-day cardio routine has not prepared you for Viking physical labor. Not even close. Still, there's something weirdly satisfying about the aches now. Like your muscles are learning a language they didn't know they spoke, one that says, yes, I can carry that bucket of seaweed, and sure, I'll drag this net through mud and tears. But today's task is a little different. The fishing gear is already out. You're pulled aside by an older man with a beard so impressive it could host its own village meeting. He grunts, points to the woods behind the village, and hands you an axe. Okay. Apparently, it's your turn to help gather firewood and repair timber for the boat sheds. You're not sure if this is a punishment or a reward, but you nod like you totally know how to fell trees and haul logs like it's just another Tuesday. Mainstream historical fact. Viking coastal villages didn't just rely on the sea, they depended on nearby woodlands for fuel-building materials and tools. Gathering timber was constant work. Even fishing boats had to be patched and reinforced with wood harvested by hand, often dragged for miles without carts. You follow the beard, let's call him Tor for half an hour, up a path that would definitely be classified as rugged terrain on a modern hiking app. The forest is dense and alive with sound rustling branches, distant bird calls, and that one squirrel you swear is judging you from a tree stump. Tor doesn't speak much. He just grunts and nods occasionally, which seems to be Viking for you're doing okay, or possibly don't die. He swings his axe like he's swatting flies, chopping through thick branches with a few practiced strokes. You, on the other hand, make contact with the log and immediately feel the vibration shoot up into your fillings. It's not exactly graceful or effective. You try again and again. Eventually, you manage to chip off a piece roughly the size of a small potato. Tor doesn't laugh. He just gives you a look. You decide that's progress. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking woodsmen wore charms made of wood from sacred trees, which they believed would protect them from forest spirits, especially during solo trips deep into the woods. One such spirit was the Skogsru, a mysterious female guardian of the forest who could lead you astray or steal your soul if you disrespected the land. You're now very careful not to kick any mushrooms. Historians still argue whether the Viking belief in these land spirits was literal or symbolic, a way of instilling respect for nature or a genuine fear of the supernatural. Either way, you find yourself whispering sorry every time you step on a twig that looks a little too alive. The work is slow but methodical. You and Tor drag branches into piles, chop them down to manageable pieces, and bind them with rough rope. Your palms blister again. Of course they do. But you get into a rhythm. Chop, drag, stack, breathe, repeat. Lunch is eaten right there in the clearing, a dried fish sandwich with barley bread so dense it could deflect arrows. You sit on a log and chew in silence. Tor says something in Old Norse. You nod like you understood. Later, back in the village, the wood is sorted. Some of it goes to the cooking fires, some to the longhouse's central hearth, and the straighter pieces are measured for replacing beams in the shed where the nets are stored. You're handed a crude chisel and asked to help smooth out a support plank. You are, it turns out, terrible at woodworking. Your first attempt produces something more closely resembling a giant splinter than a usable beam. You're gently redirected towards stacking duties. You accept this demotion with humility and relief. Mainstream historical note. Viking carpentry was highly skilled. Even though they used rudimentary tools like adzes, chisels, and saws, they constructed incredibly seaworthy boats and sturdy homes, all without modern nails or power tools. Pegs, ropes, and interlocking joints held everything together. If IKEA existed back then, it would still take you 3 days to build a chair. As the sun begins to lower, the village starts to shift again. Fires are lit. Meals are prepared. Children chase each other with sticks that are probably not weapons. You notice someone shaping a fishhook from bone with a small knife, whittling and smoothing it like it's second nature. You sit beside him watching. He hands you a scrap of bone and a dull blade, silently daring you to try. You manage to carve something vaguely curved before slicing your thumb. It's not serious, just enough to sting and swell your pride. He grins and wraps a scrap of wool around your finger like a bandage. Next time, sharper knife, he says. You nod solemnly. That seems like good life advice in general. As night falls, the longhouse fills again. This time, you don't hesitate by the door. You know where to sit, where to put your boots, and how to lean your back against the wall, just so to avoid the draft. Dinner is more stew this time, with a suspiciously chewy ingredient you pretend not to identify, and coarse ale. It's fine. Your standards are dangerously low now. People are livelier tonight. Someone plays a lyre, a stringed instrument that sounds like a banjo's great-great-grandfather. A group begins to chant a poem, probably about heroes or shipwrecks or heroic shipwrecks. You don't know the words, but the rhythm settles into your chest like a heartbeat. Quirky side note. Many Viking longhouses doubled as gathering halls where stories were told, songs were shared, and judgments passed. Gossip flowed freely, and so did mead during feasts. Some villages even had dedicated law speakers, people who memorized legal codes and recited them aloud like bardic lawyers. Imagine Judge Judy, but with a fur cloak and a sword. Someone retells a story about a sea serpent sighting last year. The kids gasp. The adults roll their eyes. One woman swears she saw it too. Long as two boats, she says. Eyes like lanterns. You're not sure whether to laugh or check your bunk for scales later. As the fire dims, people curl up again, bundled in cloaks, arms, and dreams. You find your spot. Your body screams in protest, but your mind is quiet, soothed. You fall asleep to the soft sound of waves beyond the hill, and the creaking wood above you, timbers you helped bring home. You wake to the smell of smoke. Not the dangerous kind, no flames licking the walls, but the everyday someone lit the hearth too early again kind. Your eyes water as you sit up, coughing gently into your sleeve. A few others stir and grumble, rolling over like Viking burritos beneath their woolen cloaks. Outside, it's foggy. The kind of fog that swallows sound and blurs shapes until the entire world looks like it was drawn with smudged charcoal. You step carefully over sleeping legs and boots toward the door, swinging it open into a wall of mist. Today is not a fishing day. It's market day. Now market might conjure images of neat stalls, vendors shouting over each other, and string lights twinkling overhead. Viking market day is not that. Imagine a muddy patch of land where people gather to yell trade, show off dubious homemade goods, and occasionally argue about whether someone's goat is actually a sheep. Still, it's the village's biggest social event this week. Everyone's gearing up. There's excitement in the air, or maybe just the scent of pickled herring. Mainstream historical fact, Viking markets, or kaupang, were vital community events. Though many were seasonal or itinerant, larger ones, like Birka or Hedeby, became permanent trading hubs. People didn't just exchange goods. They shared stories, resolved disputes, and even arranged marriages. Bartering was the norm, with silver tools, livestock, and exotic items from distant lands changing hands. You're assigned a job, carry a basket of dried fish, some wool, and strangely a small carved walrus tooth. Trade bait, someone tells you with a wink. You don't ask for details. The walk to the market site is short but slow because the village is traveling together like one big, very disorganized parade. Kids chase after each other with sticks. A man carries a goose that is not happy about the arrangement. And two women argue loudly about which of their tunics is more trade-worthy. You pass between tall wooden posts that mark the edge of the temporary market. On one is a small carved symbol, a spiral within a square. Trade luck, someone says. You nod solemnly. That feels official enough. The fog lingers, but you can make out outlines of makeshift booths, animal pens, and bundles of furs stacked high. As you step into the fray, the noise picks up. Voices rise and fall. Someone is already shouting about the quality of their mead. A dog barks. A goat escapes. Chaos ensues. You get nudged into a spot near a woman selling beads and hand-woven cords. She gestures to your fish basket, then to a small clay pot. You shrug. A deal is struck. You now own what might be honey or possibly lard. You don't ask. Quirky tidbit. Vikings loved ornamental beads. Archaeological digs have uncovered glass beads from as far as the Middle East in Scandinavian graves. These weren't just decoration, they were status symbols, trade items, and possibly even tokens of protection or love. So yes, that big burly guy showing off his sparkly necklace, total fashion icon. Historians still argue whether some of these trade items, like the beads or bronze figurines, were actually spiritual talismans or just fashionable fidget toys. You lean toward both. Who says sacred objects can't have a little flair? As the morning rolls on, you witness a flurry of activity. A man trades 3 bundles of dried herbs for a clay jug. A child swaps a carved toy for a goosefeather quill. A woman barters a chunk of amber for a new pair of shoes. You're pretty sure one guy tries to trade a joke for a meat skewer and succeeds. You finally make a deal of your own, a few fish, and the mysterious walrus tooth for a soft wool scarf dyed with what looks like crushed berries. The trader grins with too many teeth and pats your back. Good deal, he says. You're not so sure, but the scarf smells better than you do, so you're calling it a win. Around midday, a small crowd gathers near the central post. Someone climbs onto a crate and starts shouting loud, rhythmic, half-story, half-decree. It's the law speaker. Mainstream moment. In Viking society, law speakers, or lögsogumadur in Old Norse, held enormous responsibility. They were walking law books, responsible for memorizing and reciting the community's rules, from property disputes to punishments. At events like the Thing Scandinavia's open-air assemblies, they helped settle arguments, hear grievances, and remind everyone what not to do if they wanted to avoid exile, or worse. The man recites the week's new proclamations. Someone has to pay restitution for a broken fence. A stolen sheep has mysteriously returned with more wool than it left with. And a marriage has been declared official via a very long toast. You clap with the others, still not sure whether you're applauding justice or entertainment. Maybe both. As the market winds down, the fog begins to lift. Sunlight pierces through in scattered beams, catching on polished brooches and flickering off silver bracelets. It makes the whole place glow briefly. It's the first time since arriving you can really see the faces around you, grizzled, sun-worn, lively, tired, laughing. You wander over to a corner where a group is preparing for a game. They've cleared a flat stretch of dirt and drawn lines with sticks. Someone tosses down a round, heavy stone. Natlicker, a man says with a grin. You recognize this one. It's Viking proto-hockey, and it is not gentle. Quirky game alert. Gnatleaker was a rough-and-tumble ball game involving team sticks and what seems to be very few rules. Matches could go on for hours, sometimes days, and occasionally ended in brawls or worse. It was part sport, part training, part very public grudge match. Think rugby meets dodgeball meets unresolved family drama. You're invited to play. You decline, citing emotional fish fatigue. They laugh and pull you in anyway. Within minutes, you're dodging flying balls, swinging a stick with very little grace, and laughing harder than you have since arriving. Someone trips you definitely on purpose, and you land face first in the dirt. Everyone cheers. You're covered in mud and pride. As the sun begins to set, the market thins out. People load up carts and baskets, herding reluctant children and uncooperative goats. You help carry a bundle of wool back toward the village scarf, wrapped tightly around your neck, cheeks flushed from the cold and the game. You pass back under the spiral symbol gate, the trade luck sign. You pat it once quietly, just in case. Back at the longhouse, it's quieter tonight. Everyone's tired, satisfied. The kind of good exhaustion that comes from doing something ancient and meaningful, even if you mostly just tripped over your own stick and made questionable fish trades. You lay down the scent of pine needles and smoked meat still clinging to your hair. You're not sure if you won or lost anything today, but you were part of it. A cog in the beautiful, noisy, muddy machine of the village, and for now that feels like enough. You wake to the rhythmic clunk of metal on stone. At first, you think you're dreaming. Then the sharp tang of smoke and iron hits your nose, and you realize, nope, you're up. The blacksmith is already working. Your body feels like it's been tenderized with a blunt axe. Every joint cracks as you stretch, but curiosity drags you outside faster than aching muscles can argue. The forge is set off to one side of the village, close enough for convenience, but far enough away to prevent accidental longhouse barbecue. It's a low stone structure half open to the elements, with a sloped roof that keeps the worst of the rain off. You approach slowly, blinking against the smoke curling into the gray morning. Inside, it's chaos and order all at once. Tools hang in deliberate clusters. Coals glow with hypnotic intensity. A man shirtless, because why not, strikes red-hot iron on an anvil, sending a spark explosion into the air. The noise is deafening. You half expect him to scream, "Are you not entertained?" at any moment. Mainstream historical fact. Viking blacksmiths were essential members of any community. Without them, there'd be no fishing hooks, no axe heads, no ship rivets, no horseshoes. They made weapons, sure, but also locks, cauldrons, nails, needles, and jewelry. Some smiths even held semi-sacred status as their work turned raw earth into tools of survival. You're waved over by an assistant, a boy maybe 12 years old, with soot on his cheeks and confidence in his step. He hands you tongs and a lump of something that might be iron, or possibly just a very angry rock. You're being taught how to make a nail. You watch closely, heat it, until it glows like the setting sun. Then place it on the anvil, flatten one end with quick hammer strikes, rotate hammer again, and then shape the tip. The assistant makes it look easy. You, however, manage to send your first attempt flying like a hot, useless comet. It lands in the hay pile. No fire. Miracle. You're given a second chance. And a third. Eventually, you shape something vaguely nail-shaped. It's crooked and stubby, and your fingers feel like they've aged a decade, but it's yours. Quirky tidbit. In some Norse traditions, blacksmiths were believed to have magical powers. There are tales of smiths forging swords that could cut through mountains, or nails so strong they were used to pin down spirits. One Icelandic saga tells of a man who carried a lucky horseshoe made by a blacksmith rumored to have spoken with dwarves. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were seen as literal magicians or just awe-inspiring craftspeople. Either way, it's easy to see how the sheer alchemy of fire and iron would seem like sorcery to a world without machines. After the forge, your next lesson involves maintenance, specifically the sharpening of tools. You're handed a dull axe head and a whetstone the size of your palm. There's a rhythm to it. Scrape turn, check the edge, repeat. After a few minutes, you've zoned out completely. It's oddly meditative, like angry yoga. Across the yard, a man tests his freshly sharpened blade by slicing clean through a log. He nods approvingly, then asks you to try. You raise your own axe and swing with all the might your noodle arms can muster. You almost make it through the log. It's more of a dent than a slice, but again, nobody laughs. These people seem to respect effort more than results. Later, you help ferry a crate of finished nails and horseshoes to the boat shed. The smith's assistant gives you a slap on the back hard enough to dislodge a memory. Not bad, he says. You beam like you just passed Viking kindergarten. Mainstream moment. Vikings weren't just pillagers or warriors, they were excellent shipbuilders. And those ships held together by the humble iron nail. Each longship could contain thousands of them, all hammered in by hand. So while the smithy may seem far from the ocean, every clang of the hammer keeps the fleet afloat. You pause to admire one of the village's small boats, its ribbed skeleton made of curved wood and iron braces. It looks delicate, almost fragile, but you know better now. This thing could cross the North Sea like it was a backyard pond. Inside the shed, you help two older women patch a fishing net. One gestures for you to hold a section taut, while the other weaves new hemp cord through the holes. It's like crocheting with spaghetti. You try not to tangle it into a net knot monstrosity. They talk quietly in Old Norse, and you catch the occasional word: fish, storm, nail, ale. You nod whenever they laugh. It seems polite. Quirky detail. Viking women were often in charge of textiles not just for clothing, but sails, ropes, and nets. Some evidence suggests they used natural dyes like madder root and woad to color their yarns, creating vibrant blue or red sails that were both functional and a bit of a power flex. Historians still debate whether colored sails were widespread or reserved for elite ships, but a bright red sail on the horizon, pretty hard to ignore. It's the Viking equivalent of rolling up in a cherry red sports car. By mid-afternoon, your arms ache from hauling wood, your ears are ringing from the forge, and your clothes are permanently smoke-scented. Still, you feel weirdly accomplished. You've shaped metal, sharpened steel, and helped repair something someone else will use. Dinner comes early tonight. The stew tastes better maybe because your fingers helped make the tools that carve the meat. Or maybe you're just starving. Hard to say. As the longhouse settles again, someone plays a bone flute. Yes, that's a thing. The melody is soft and wandering like a lullaby written by someone who knew what it meant to fall asleep with wolves nearby. People nod off one by one. Some dream. Some just stare into the fire like it owes them answers. You find yourself doing the same. And then you hear its soft footsteps, the whisper of someone walking outside. You peek through a small opening in the wall. It's the smith. He's at the forge again, alone, working by starlight and memory. The metal glows as he shapes it carefully, lovingly, with a grace that's almost dance-like. You realize he's making something small, deliberate, a pendant maybe, or a token. And for a moment in the flicker of flame, he does look like a magician. You close your eyes. You still smell of smoke and metal, but now it's not a stench. It's a story. You wake before dawn this time. Not because someone stepped on you or a goat screamed outside or because the blacksmith's hammer is already ringing, but because you want to. The air is cold. Not dramatic, blizzard-level cold, just that biting kind of chill that wraps around your fingers and makes your nose slightly offended. The longhouse is still dark, save for the soft embers of last night's fire and the sound of someone gently snoring into what might be a turnip pillow. You creep out quietly, stepping over a pile of cloaks and someone's half-eaten onion. Outside, the world is hushed. Gray-blue light paints the sky. You inhale, and the scent of wet earth pine and morning smoke fills your lungs. Today is hunting day. Now don't panic. You're not being handed a bow and told to go bring back a moose. Not yet. You're accompanying the hunters more like a very underqualified intern. Your job is to observe, carry things, and try not to make noise. It's like a Viking field trip with higher stakes and fewer granola bars. The hunting party is small, 2 older men with weathered faces and braided beards, a younger woman with a quiet intensity that says, "I've probably wrestled a bear and a teenage boy who's definitely trying to look braver than he feels." Then there's you, wrapped in a slightly musty fur cloak and praying you don't sneeze at a critical moment. Mainstream historical fact: Vikings were skilled hunters, especially in forested and mountainous regions. They hunted deer, elk, boar, and smaller game like hares and birds. Hunting wasn't just for meat. It also supplied pelts, bones, and antlers for tools, clothing, and trade. The group walks in near silence, moving through the woods with the kind of careful efficiency that comes from decades of muscle memory. You try to match their pace stepping where they step, breathing when they breathe. You're almost in sync until you step on a stick that cracks like a lightning bolt. They all turn. You mouth sorry. They say nothing, but the woman smirks. That's probably the Viking version of a high five. After a while, you reach a clearing where tracks lace the mud. One of the men kneels, pressing his palm to the earth like some kind of Norse ranger. He mutters something and nods. The hunt is on. Quirky tidbit Vikings trained hunting birds, particularly falcons, for sport and utility. Falconry was especially popular among the nobility. A well-trained hawk was both a hunting companion and a status symbol. There are even saga references to warriors gifting birds instead of gold. Here's a falcon, my friend. I value you. Historians still argue whether falconry was widespread or limited to high-status individuals. Evidence is patchy, but bird bones and leather hoods found in elite graves suggest some Vikings took their avian allies very seriously. You sadly are falconless. The woman gestures for you to stay low. A deer has appeared at the far edge of the clearing, half shrouded in mist. It lifts its head ears, twitching. You freeze. Everyone does. Not a breath. Not a shift. Then thwip. An arrow sails silently and lands true. It's fast. Clean. The deer collapses and the others move quickly, murmuring words you don't understand. Maybe a prayer. Maybe thanks. There's a quiet respect to it, not celebration, just acknowledgement. This is survival, not sport. You help with the sled, a crude wooden frame with rope that drags across the earth like a stubborn suitcase. The deer is heavy. Your arms burn. You don't complain. This is the closest thing to gym day you've had since arriving. Mainstream moment Viking tools for skinning and butchering were precise and effective. Knife scrapers and bone tools were used to maximize every part of the animal. Meat was smoked or salted, hides were tanned, sinew became thread, and bones turned into tools or ornaments. Waste was minimal. These people lived off the land with remarkable efficiency. Back at the village, the deer is respectfully processed. One group handles the meat, another starts preparing the hide-soaking scraping and stretching it over a wooden frame to dry. The smell is intense, like a wet dog wrapped in leather and ambition. But you stick around. You've earned this grossness. You're handed a small bone and a flint tool and told to try carving something. Start simple, says the woman, like a fish. You nod, then immediately try to make a tiny dragon. It ends up looking like a slightly judgmental snake. You keep it anyway. Quirky cultural note. Bone carving was a widespread Norse art form. Vikings made combs, needles, buttons, pendants, and even game pieces from animal bones. Some carvings carried symbolic meaning, runes, animals, or protective designs. Others were just for flair. Even a hardened warrior liked a well-decorated comb. Battle's tough. Doesn't mean your hair should be. Historians still argue whether certain carvings found in graves were made by the dead person in life or by loved ones after death, like early Viking mementos. Either way, these trinkets told stories, even if we no longer know the words. Later that day, the woman from the hunt brings you a bowl of warm stewed deer meat, herbs, wild onion, and something tangy that could be berries or possibly fermented hope. She sits beside you, poking at the fire, then gestures toward your sad bone snake. You tried, she says. Then she hands you a better-carved version of the same creature. You don't say anything. You just hold it like it's made of gold. Night falls again. The longhouse smells like smoke and broth. Your body aches, your hands are stained, and your pockets now contain 2 carved bones, a shiny bead, and a suspiciously lucky rock. You stare at the ceiling, thinking about how silent the forest was, about how life here is loud and slow and simple and complicated all at once, about how nobody expects you to be great just to show up. Try, help, learn. And tomorrow, who knows? Maybe you'll track a fox, or finally master the axe swing, or just stay by the fire carving lopsided dragons until someone laughs, and that would be enough. You wake up with a tail. Well, not literally, but as you step out of the longhouse, rubbing sleep from your eyes and stretching muscles that have absolutely had enough of this historical fitness boot camp, you notice something a small child, maybe 6 or 7, is following you. He's barefoot hair, tangled nose, running slightly in that eternal kid kind of way, and he looks at you like you might turn into a dragon at any second. You give him a little wave. He doesn't wave back. He just squints, then shuffles closer. So you have a shadow now. Today's plan, apparently, is help the kids. Which sounds relaxing until you remember that Viking children don't get nap mats and alphabet songs. They get jobs. Real ones. Training starts early, and no one is waiting until you're 18 to hand you a knife and a responsibility. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children were expected to contribute to the household from a young age. Boys learned hunting, fishing, and combat skills. Girls practiced weaving, cooking, and managing the home. By age 12, most children were already being prepared for adult roles, and some even joined raids by their teens. The village's children gather in a wide clearing near the edge of the woods. There's a sort of casual structure to it. One older teen leads the others in drills, teaching them how to swing a stick like a sword or throw a small axe at a log target. It's less playtime, more warrior preschool. Your tale, who now offers up the name Bjorn, though it might just be the only word he knows, hands you a stick and gestures for you to join in. You nod, suddenly aware that these kids are all probably better at this than you are. The training begins. You mimic their movements, wide stances, controlled swings, proper breathing. You nearly take out a goat during one of your over-enthusiastic twirls. The goat, unbothered, just walks away with an air of practiced indignation. One girl, maybe 10, is a terrifying prodigy. She hits every target moves like she's already survived 3 winters and 2 dragons, and eyes you with something between amusement and pity. Your feet are too slow, she says. You take the note. Quirky tidbit Viking kids played games that doubled as combat training. One such game involved mock battles with blunted weapons, and another involved running through obstacle courses while carrying heavy stones. Strength and cunning were praised. There are even records of games where kids tried to knock each other over using only their hips. Viking sumo, basically. Historians still argue whether these games were formalized training or just kids being kids in a world that rewarded toughness. Either way, the line between game and preparing for battle was pretty thin. After the stick fights, the kids shift into chores. 2 of the older boys drag a sled filled with firewood while others help carry water from a nearby stream. You're handed a bucket. Bjorn insists on carrying one too, despite it being almost as big as his entire body. You walk together in silence, his little feet pattering beside yours. At the stream, the kids take a moment to splash around. A few practice skipping stones. One boy catches a frog and shows it off proudly. You join in, managing to skip a rock 3 times before it sinks, like your dignity during axe practice. Mainstream moment. Childhood in the Viking Age wasn't sugar-coated. Many children didn't survive past infancy, and those who did grew up fast. But archaeological evidence like toys, carved animals, and game pieces shows that even in a harsh world, kids still found joy. They laughed, played, and made tiny wooden boats to sail in puddles. You return to the village soaked up to your knees but feeling a weird lightness. There's something grounding about hauling water with a group of under-10s who treat life like an adventure and mud like currency. Back near the longhouse, you help with weaving a task led by 3 older girls who clearly run the show. You're shown how to twist fibers into string, how to wrap it around a small loom, and how to avoid tangling it into something resembling angry spaghetti. You fail at that last part. One girl snorts at your attempt. You weave like a goat. You nod solemnly. Thank you. Quirky craft note. Viking children often learned spinning and weaving as early as 5 or 6 years old. Wool and flax were spun into yarn, which was then dyed using natural materials like birch bark and berries. Young girls in particular were expected to master textile skills, which were essential for clothing and trade. Historians still argue whether young boys were equally involved in textile production, or if it was strictly a female domain. Some burials suggest overlap, while others lean more traditional. Either way, weaving was vital, and skilled weavers were highly respected. As the sun sinks lower, the kids gather for one final game. It's a sort of tag meets wrestling contest, where one child chases the others while everyone tries to dodge and trip without using their hands. You're roped in immediately. You're out within 10 seconds. Still, Bjorn gives you a nod of approval, which is basically a trophy. That evening, back inside the longhouse, the children sit in a corner and whisper among themselves. They trade carved toys and strange-looking dice made of bone. One girl hands you a tiny wooden horse, crudely carved, wobbly-legged, and perfect. You don't ask why. You just accept it. As the fire crackles and adults drift into sleep, the kids keep talking in hushed tones, telling stories the way kids everywhere do, some exaggerated, some scary, some pure nonsense. You listen from your mat smiling. For all the cold, the hard work, and the aching muscles, there's warmth here. Not just from the fire, but from the people, especially the smallest ones who see you not as an outsider, but as a very slow, very tall, new friend. Bjorn, curled up in his cloak, mutters one last word before sleep takes him. Tomorrow. Yeah, kid, let's see what tomorrow brings. You wake to the sound of shouting, but it's not panic. It's excitement, maybe even joy. Which, let's be honest, is a little unsettling in a place where most news involves fish guts or frostbite. You sit up, blanket tangled around your legs like a wool snake. Bjorn's already gone probably halfway up a tree or challenging a goose to single combat. You follow the noise outside and find the village buzzing. A boat is coming in, and not just any boat. A proper Viking longship, its carved prow slicing through the mist like it's late for something important. Men and women line the shoreline, waving and yelling. Kids run down with bundles of fresh herbs and inexplicably a goat wearing a wreath. You squint. Is that music? Yes. A bone flute somewhere in the distance bleating out a melody that sounds like an ancient version of a kazoo solo. Someone's even banging a drum, likely a turned-over cooking pot. Mainstream historical fact, longships were the heart of Viking travel and warfare. Sleek, fast, and shallow-bottomed, they could sail across oceans and also navigate narrow rivers. Crewed by warriors, traders, and sometimes whole families, these ships connected remote villages to the wider Norse world. As the ship glides to shore, people rush forward, helping the crew disembark. Some carry bundles wrapped in fur goods for trade. Others unload barrels, tools, and what looks suspiciously like a pig. There's hugging, laughing, and a lot of proud shoulder-slapping. You drift closer, trying not to look like someone who just woke up with moss in their hair. Someone recognizes you. A crew member with salt and pepper braids and a face like he's seen 20 winters and 3 sea monsters gives you a nod. You're the outsider, he says. Not unkindly, just fact. You nod. Yes, sorry. He laughs and claps your shoulder. Welcome to the part of the village that actually does something interesting. Quirky tidbit. Vikings had complex trade networks stretching from the North Atlantic all the way to Byzantium and the Middle East. They traded amber walrus, ivory furs, and slaves. Though don't worry, nobody's suggesting you're on the market. In return, they got silver silk spices and glass beads. Some Viking burials contain coins from as far away as Baghdad. Historians still argue whether these expeditions were primarily raiding missions with trade on the side or vice versa. The truth is, probably both Vikings had a unique talent for showing up with swords and silver. You help unload. It's not glamorous, mostly lifting sacks of dried fish and sniffing cautiously at fermented things that may or may not be legal in your century. But the crew appreciates the help, even tossing you a small pouch of dried berries as thanks. Mainstream moment. Viking sailors weren't just warriors, they were navigators, astronomers, and carpenters. They used sun compasses, landmarks, and even the migration patterns of birds to guide their journeys. Some sagas mention magical sunstones that helped find the sun's position even on cloudy days. Whether those were real tools or poetic flourishes is still debated. Once everything's unloaded, the longship is pulled ashore, its hull scraped and checked for damage. You join the maintenance crew, mostly young men with calloused hands and practical grins. You scrape barnacles off the wood with a bone tool, trying not to flick one onto your own foot. You do. Twice. One of the older sailors sees you struggling and shows you the right angle to hold the scraper. "Let the barnacle feel your intent," he says. You stare. "My intent." He nods solemnly. "Yes? Show it who's boss." You do. It works. The barnacle gives up and peels off with a sound like ancient popcorn. Quirky cultural note. Ship maintenance was constant and communal. The entire village helped repair sails, patch leaks, and oil wood with animal fat. Some ships were so beloved they were given names and personalities. One saga even mentions a ship that refused to sink out of pride. That's either good engineering or excellent marketing. Later, the villagers gather for a mini festival, less formal than a seasonal rite, but still full of life. There's food, music, and storytelling around the fire. You're handed a bowl of stew and a carved wooden spoon. Across from you, one of the crewmates begins telling a story of a sea voyage gone wrong, involving a whale, a thunderstorm, and a man who lost his trousers for 3 full days. The crowd laughs. Kids shout questions. Someone passes around a jug that smells like it could strip paint. You politely decline. Historians still argue whether these oral stories were mostly true, wildly exaggerated, or just Saturday night entertainment. What's clear is that they served to bond communities, share knowledge, and make even the harshest lives feel rich with meaning. As the sun fades, a woman begins to sing. It's not a melody you recognize, something low, almost like a chant, but the entire group quiets. You close your eyes and let it wash over you, the hum of the sea, nearby the crackle of fire, the deep note of a drum carried on the breeze. You're not sure when it happens, but someone leans over and drapes a fur over your shoulders. You're not shivering, but it feels right, like you're being tucked into this world bit by bit. By night's end, the longship crew have found spots in the longhouse or curled up near fires. Bjorn is asleep under a bench with his toy horse clutched tight. You lie back and stare at the stars, the kind you never really noticed before. There's no city glow here, just raw, unfiltered sky. You imagine the sailors watching these same stars on the open sea, trying to find home or maybe find something new. Someone nearby murmurs a blessing in Old Norse. You don't understand it, but you feel it. Tonight you sleep with the scent of sea salt and pine, the rhythm of oars still echoing somewhere in your bones. And in your dreams, maybe, you sail. You wake up convinced that something is wrong with your nose. It takes you a few moments to realize that the stinging smell isn't imaginary, it's smoke. Not fire in a bad way smoke, but more like campfire meets sage meets mystery herb smoke. The kind that clings to your clothes, your hair, and possibly your soul. It's ritual day. As in today, the village honors the gods, and you, dear time traveler, are invited. You step outside to a scene that feels older than words. A low mist curls along the ground, muffling sound and making everything feel slower, softer. The villagers are dressed in their finest, which mostly means slightly less patched wool cleaner boots and elaborate metal clasps or brooches that shine in the gray light. Mainstream historical fact. The Vikings practiced what we call Norse paganism, a polytheistic belief system filled with gods, giant spirits, and a surprisingly organized cosmology. Odin, Thor, and Freya are just the tip of the iceberg. Rituals included offerings, sacrifices, chanting, and feasting, often to honor seasonal changes or ask for protection and luck. You follow a small group as they walk silently into the woods, carrying baskets of food, carved figurines, and bundles of herbs. One woman carries a bowl of blood. You try not to stare at that last one. The ritual site is a natural clearing surrounded by stones, some standing tall, others toppled by time. There's a wooden idol in the center, roughly human-shaped, with an exaggerated beard and eyes that seem to follow you. A tree behind it is wrapped in colorful cloth strips, fluttering like flags. The air is thick with incense, pine resin, dried juniper, and something sharp you can't place. Someone begins to chant. The rest join in. You're not sure what the words mean, but the rhythm is steady, the tone low and resonant. It's oddly calming. Like thunder you can sit inside. Quirky tidbit. Viking rituals weren't always solemn affairs. Some included theatrical storytelling, dancing, or even staged duels called holmgangs as part of the celebration. Animal sacrifices, usually pigs, goats, or even horses, were made to honor the gods and share a feast afterward. And no, thankfully, you are not the pig in question. Historians still argue whether rituals were led by professional priests called gothi, or if leadership rotated based on status and the occasion. Some regions had women priestesses or gidja who were highly respected. Others treated it more like a community-led potluck with supernatural flair. The ritual proceeds with offerings, bread-dried berries, a splash of mead onto the ground. One boy lays a small carved horse at the idol's feet. You're nudged forward. Someone hands you a flower crown. You hesitate for 1 second too long, and then Bjorn shows up out of nowhere and plops it on your head like he's knighting you. So, you're flower royalty now. A woman approaches with a bowl. Not the blood one, thankfully. This one has ash and crushed herbs. She dabs a streak onto your forehead with her finger, murmuring something that sounds like a blessing, a warning, or maybe a recipe. You accept it with a nod, trying to look like you've done this before. Mainstream moment rituals were deeply tied to the Norse worldview. They believed in fate known as weird, and in maintaining balance with unseen forces. Offering to the gods wasn't just about worship, it was about ensuring the ongoing survival of the community. Bad harvest, blame the spirits. Lucky voyage, thank Thor. Strange outsider waking up in your longhouse. Better give them a flower crown just in case. After the chanting, the mood shifts. Someone strikes a drum, and a slow dance begins. It's not flashy, just steps in a circle, hands joined, feet stomping lightly in rhythm. You're pulled into the ring heart, thudding a bit faster now. You move clumsily at first, then let yourself be carried by the rhythm. The mist, the music, the scent of herbs and fire, it all blurs together into something ancient and strange and oddly beautiful. Quirky note. Some Viking rituals included symbolic gestures like walking through smoke to cleanse oneself, tying wishes to trees, or casting runes for divine answers. Today, someone is doing just that, etching runes into a flat stone, then tossing it into the fire. It hisses sparks, and everyone cheers. You don't know what the rune meant, but you clap anyway. Historians still argue whether rune casting was meant for serious divination or more casual guidance. Some sagas treat it like prophecy, others treat it like flipping a coin. Either way, people listened when the runes spoke. After the fire dies down, the villagers share a simple feast. Barley cake, smoked meat, pickled vegetables, and fermented milk that you pretend to enjoy. Children run between the trees, faces smudged with ash and mischief. You sit under the offering tree, watching strips of cloth flutter above you like sleepy butterflies. One woman sits beside you and offers a carved pendant, simple, circular, etched with a spiral. For protection, she says, from whatever path you're on. You thank her, then realize you mean it more than you expected to. As the light fades, the villagers drift back to their homes full and a little drunk on ritual and mead. Bjorn catches your hand and pulls you along. You glance back once at the clearing now lit only by dying embers and the glow of offerings. You lie in the longhouse later that night, the pendant warm in your palm. You don't understand the gods of this place. You don't speak the words. But you felt something in that circle, in the rhythm of feet, in the heat of fire and song and smoke. Maybe that's the point. Not to understand, but to be part of something ancient, if only for a moment. You fall asleep with ash on your forehead and dreams full of spirals. You wake to the rhythmic thump of wood on wood. Not drums this time, though, that would be impressive at dawn, but axes and mallets. The kind of early morning music that tells you today is a building day. You shuffle outside, still wearing your tunic askew, and find a group of villagers already deep in construction mode. There's a half-raised timber frame at the edge of the village, posts driven into the soil like ribs waiting for skin. Bjorn is there too, of course, pretending to measure things with a stick that is definitely not to scale. You blink sleep from your eyes. What are we building? Boathouse, someone replies through a mouthful of dried fish. Of course, because Vikings don't do days off, they do carpentry. Mainstream historical fact. Viking villages often included communal workshops and boathouses where longships were stored, repaired, or even built from scratch. Shipbuilding was a deeply respected skill combining artistry, geometry, and brute force. Iron tools like adzes, axes, and augers were used alongside natural adhesives like pine tar. You're handed a mallet not by request, but by assumption. You give it a few testing swings, then wisely let someone show you how to not break a finger. The wood is local pine, tough, sappy, and fragrant. It splits with a satisfying crack under the right angle and under the wrong one. Well, it just sort of mocks you. You help raise a beam holding one end while a team hoists the other. A boy scampers up like a squirrel to lash it into place. No harness, no fear, just a grin and bare feet. You envy that confidence, but not the splinters. Quirky tidbit. Some Norse legends say the first humans were made from trees, ask from an ash tree, embla from an elm. So wood, in a way, isn't just material, it's spiritual. Every log has a memory, every beam a voice. Some builders even whispered blessings into the joints before hammering them shut. Historians still argue whether Viking carpentry techniques were shared across all regions or varied wildly by local tradition. Evidence suggests both. In coastal Norway, ship design favored deeper keels for ocean sailing. In shallow fjords and rivers, flatter hulls were more common. But the fundamentals, strong, flexible wood and cunning joinery, remained universal. You watch as a master carpenter works a curved rib into shape, using nothing but steam and rope. It bends slowly, stubbornly, like it knows it's becoming part of something sacred. Nearby, a small forge roars to life. Blacksmiths are reworking nails and rivets, heating and pounding them with rhythmic clangs that echo across the bay. Sparks fly. The smell of hot iron mixes with smoke and sea air. It's oddly comforting, like Viking aromatherapy. Mainstream moment iron was precious in Viking society, not just for weapons, but for tools, hinges, and fittings. Most nails were hand-forged, making them so valuable that abandoned buildings were often dismantled for scrap. In fact, one old Viking joke goes, "Marry the widow, get the house, and all the nails." You take a break and watch from a rock near the shoreline. The village bustles like an ant colony, focused, efficient, purposeful. Children carry tools back and forth. Women sort nails and materials. Dogs weave between legs, sniffing for dropped snacks. Bjorn brings you a bowl of something hot and suspiciously gray. You eat it anyway. It tastes like porridge with ambition. Then it's back to work. You're assigned to help carve a decorative figurehead. Not for a ship this time, but for the boathouse's gable, an animal of sorts, though no one can quite agree what it's supposed to be. Wolf bear, mythical sheep with vengeance issues. You go with dragonish. Quirky note. Viking architecture wasn't just functional, it was expressive. Dragon heads twisting serpents and geometric motifs were carved into beams, door frames, and roof ridges. These weren't just art, they were believed to ward off evil, honor the gods, or intimidate the neighbors. Basically, early medieval curb appeal. As you scrape fine lines into the wooden snout, a few children gather to watch. One guesses it's a sea snake. Another says it's clearly a moose. You tell them it's Bjorn before his morning stew. They erupt in laughter, including Bjorn himself, who sticks out his tongue and pelts you with a pebble. The sky darkens slightly as clouds gather overhead. Rain's coming, but no one rushes. They just keep working with practiced calm, knowing every board placed is one less soaked tomorrow. Historians still argue whether Viking communal labor was truly democratic or subtly hierarchical. Did chieftains pitch in shoulder to shoulder or just supervise with carved staffs and strong opinions? Some evidence says yes to both. It likely depended on the village and on how close winter was breathing down their necks. As the first drops fall, the work pauses. A cloth tarp is stretched over the site, and the younger kids are sent running inside. You help stack tools and secure the dragon carving to a shelf where it'll dry overnight. The forge is doused, hissing like an offended snake. Back in the longhouse, steam rises from everyone's cloaks and boots. There's a quiet satisfaction in the air. Not celebration, not quite. Just the slow-burning pride of things made by hand. Someone carves a tally mark into a beam one day, closer to completion. Bjorn, still buzzing with energy, shows you his sketchbook, such as it is a scrap of bark, with a charcoal doodle of what might be the boathouse or a squashed chicken. You tell him it's perfect. He beams. That night, your hands are sore in places you didn't know existed. You feel each callus like a medal, each splinter like a tiny badge of honor. Your arms throb, your legs ache, but you sleep hard. In your dreams, the dragon you carved swims through the sea tail, lashing eyes glowing. It carries a boat on its back, your boat, and you standing at the prow, with wind in your face and laughter in your lungs. The boat never reaches shore. It sails into mist, into memory, into stories not yet written. And all around it the stars hum. The wind has teeth this morning. It chews at your sleeves and whistles through the gaps in the longhouse walls like it's testing your resolve. You tug your cloak tighter, but there's no real escape from the cold. It lives here like everything else. Today is the village's last day before the season truly turns. Winter's not knocking anymore. It's halfway through the door, tracking snow on the rugs. Which means one thing, it's time to prepare the fish cellar. And no, that is not a charming metaphor. You join a line of villagers trudging down to the lower slope near the waterline. There's a squat stone structure there, dug partially into the earth with a wooden roof that smells like it was soaked in brine sometime last century. This is the fish cellar, or hjallar in the old tongue, a place for storing dried, smoked, and fermented fish. Mainstream historical fact: fish was a cornerstone of Viking diets, especially in coastal villages. They relied heavily on stockfish, wind-dried cod, smoked herring, and fermented varieties like rackfisk or surströmming, which make modern noses cry for mercy. These foods could last for months, sometimes even years, and were traded as valuable commodities throughout Europe. You walk in behind Bjorn, who cheerfully informs you this one's a bit ripe, then disappears inside, leaving you to brace for impact. The smell hits like a wall, not just fishy, not just salty, it's ancestral, as if every mackerel ever caught came here to retire. You help stack the last of the season's haul. Bundles of dried fish are wrapped in linen and layered on wooden racks. Fermented fish are packed in barrels sealed with tar and hope. There's even a sealed stone jar labeled with what might be a rune, or maybe just a warning. You do not open the jar. Quirky tidbit Vikings didn't just preserve fish, they created entire social events around it. Some communities held fermentation feasts, where the bravest would sample the smelliest dishes to prove their strength and perhaps their questionable judgment. Winners were sometimes rewarded with extra portions of drink, or a week's worth of teasing if they gagged. Historians still argue whether fermented fish was universally loved or just tolerated for its nutritional punch. Some sagas treat it like a delicacy. Others suggest it was more of a desperate winter compromise. You, for one vote, nope. After finishing in the cellar, you step outside, gratefully breathing in air that feels suspiciously delicious by comparison, even though it's still wet with sleet. The village is in winterizing mode. Straw mats are tied to the outside of buildings for insulation. Thick woolen curtains hang in doorways. The blacksmith coats tools in oil before storage. Even the goats look fluffier, like they know what's coming. Mainstream moment. Winters in the Viking world were long, dark, and brutal. Villages had to be largely self-sufficient from November through March. Firewood was rationed, food was preserved with obsessive care, and clothing was layered like medieval lasagna. Even simple illnesses could become fatal without warmth and nutrition. You help patch a roof with dried turf, layering it like shingles. It's backbreaking work, especially with frozen fingers, but there's a strange satisfaction in it. This village is a machine, and every piece, every person has a role. You're no longer just that odd guest. You're part of the winter prep crew. You've earned your blister stripes. Inside the longhouse, final inventories are counted. Food is divided by household. Tools are stashed near sleeping areas to prevent rust. Extra blankets are pulled from storage, some so old and worn they're more patch than fabric. Someone hands you a flask of herbal concoction brewed for stamina. It tastes like tree bark and bravery. Quirky note: Vikings often added wild herbs and even animal fat to winter drinks to boost calories and ward off illness. Juniper yarrow and angelica root were popular additions. One infamous remedy involved soaking onions in honey and applying the mix to one's chest. The smell alone probably scared the cough away. As night falls, there's a quiet sort of tension in the air. Not fear, just awareness. The kind that settles when you know something bigger than you is about to arrive, and all you can do is be ready. Historians still argue whether Viking winters led to more communal bonding or increased cabin fever. Some stories suggest cozy nights of storytelling and carving. Others hint at midwinter arguments that ended with snowballs and bruised pride. Both are likely true. You sit beside the hearth legs, stretched toward the fire, as Bjorn carves a new charm from bone, a sunwheel symbol meant to bring light back faster. He hands it to you without a word. You tuck it into your belt. Outside, the first snow begins to fall in earnest. Thick flakes, soft as ash, drift down in silence. The village is ready. You are as ready as you'll ever be. You climb into your bedding that night with the kind of deep fatigue that feels earned. Your bones hum, your hands throb, your heart is full. You've hauled fish-baked bread, carved dragons, and danced under stars you don't know the names of. You've walked through mist with ash on your forehead and laughed with children about mythical moose. You who wouldn't last a day have lasted longer. Maybe not gracefully, definitely not fragrantly, but still. As the wind howls across the rooftops and the embers glow low, you realize something odd. You're not just surviving anymore. You belong. And now as the fire fades and the village settles under its first soft blanket of snow, your breath slows. Outside the wind has quieted to a whisper, just the occasional creak of timber, or the distant howl of a wolf echoing through the dark pines. But it's far off now, and safe. You're wrapped in warmth, in stillness, in the gentle hush of a world gone calm. Your bed of straw and furs no longer feels foreign. It cradles you like it remembers your shape. The wool itches less. The cold no longer bites it, just nudges, reminding you you're alive. The longhouse murmurs with sleep. Someone snores softly near the hearth. A baby whimpers and is hushed by the rhythm of a lullaby passed down like old iron tools, well-worn, unbreakable. The dragon you carved watches from the rafters, its wooden eyes softened by shadow. The sunwheel charm you wear is warm against your chest, catching the last flicker of flame like a promise spring will come. You've earned your place here. Among the fish and frost, the laughter and labor, the myths and mud. You didn't just make it through a day, you've carved your name into the timbers of this story. So breathe in, let the snow fall, let the wind sleep, and as your eyes close, drift easy, knowing that in this strange little Viking world you made it home. Sweet dreams, time traveler.